Yuck, germs!
Good thing I'm a dick.
Ed, and Eddy. Is a show. Not just a regular show, though. A kid's show.
What a bunch of fucking bullshit.
Yeah, really. One that was made by a very edgy Canadian animator. And one of the golden rules of the internet states that if a kid's show exists, there must be a creepypasta about it. SpongeBob has one, the Rugrats have one, even Coconut Fred has one. And Ed, and Eddy is no different, having quite a few such as episode 34, the 4chan game, and the Purgatory Theory, the latter of which just might be one of the most well-known creepypastas of all time, being up there with the likes of Red Mist and Candle Cove in a subgenre of creepypastas known as the Lost Episodes. Episodes of a TV show that diverges from the standards and norms of what it was normally, aka dark and edgy blood-fested fanfics. Every Gen Zer who got into creepypastas around the early to mid 2010s all know about the Purgatory Theory, either from creepypasta readings, stumbling across it yourself on forums, hearing about it from a friend, or maybe you heard it from one of those clickbait top list channels where they try to pass off an edgy fanfiction as a totally real fact, despite what the creator says. And we all know how this story goes by now. They are not alive, they dead, with blue and green tongues from different time periods. And now their souls are trapped within a purgatory that mimics their home, forever lost. While free trailer trash demons tortured them, especially the main trio because main character's sake. Many tend to dog on the story for being inaccurate to the source material, like how it mentions that Eddy was born in the 30s even though his room is decked out with disco stuff, and how Jimmy was bullied into just being dead to himself in the futuristic year of 2000, even though the show did not air until 1999. The story also tries to out-edge its creator, with Naz getting violated by an escaped mental asylum patient, and with Kevin getting hit a little too hard by his dad's death. I would agree with people saying that this story is dumb, but I will cut it some slack, as I am a bit biased towards these older creepypastas. They just have a certain charm about them that newer ones just do not have, like a so bad it's good kind of charm. Since most of these stories are written by random people instead of actual talented writers. Well, except for Candle Cove, but that pasta's goated, so it's off the hook. And when thinking about older creepypastas, I thought, hey, why not look at a bunch of Ed and Eddy creepypastas? A crap ton of people made videos going over SpongeBob, Sonic, and Mario ones, but besides from a few readings, no one has really gone over any of these Free Stooges knockoffs. So I will be going over free Ed and Eddy creepypastas, with the third one being an obscure mystery one. Starting off with episode 34, since I've already brushed past the Purgatory Theory. So kick back, relax, find your curbside pineapple can openers, because we're gonna dive into a sea of terrifyingly mediocrity. So this story is easily the second most popular Ed and Eddy creepypasta. Just like prior, it used to be seen as one of the scariest lost episodes out there, until recent years where it has faced a lot of scrutiny for its god-awful grammar and cliches. Now, do I think this story sucks? Well, let us dive right in and see. So this story starts off with the author explaining that during the events between October 7th through the 21st, episode 34 was accidentally released before it was scheduled to. Many of the viewers who watched it talked about how extremely terrible this episode was. Even worse than Smile for the Ed, with the characters acting out of character, being big poopy meanie faces towards each other, and then suddenly some dude with a lisp and sexual tone that the story put a heavy influence on for some reason, decides to talk about what exactly happened in the episode. The episode starts with Ed and Eddy walking down the street. Double D was nowhere to be seen. Eddy was mad. Very mad. So mad that he was red. While Ed was sad. Very sad. So sad to the point that the animation budget was running thin. Suddenly, Kevin appears to commit vehicular manslaughter against the dorks, but before the good shit could start, a blackout happens. Double D suddenly appears in Eddy's room, in claymation. He becomes a weasel and screams while running in circles for some reason. We see Eddy's door for an infuriatingly long time. Next scene, we see Jimmy and Sarah at the dentist, where a very tall man comes busting in like he owns the place. He sends Sarah out good, and we see Jimmy, who lost all his limbs and somehow still alive, while his headgear was mangled. The sexually toneless man cried from this scene, while everyone who watched If It Smells Like an Ed rejoiced. Commercials came back on for a bit until the program came back on with Rolf, who was having a fistfight with Beatrice's rear end. Naz was Eddy is back without an Ed, as he had to go for violin practice. So he's now happy as God took pity on him. So Eddy runs to his house, which is nice and bright. Eddy heads to his room. Who cares? Let's get back to Naz. She is reading, and then an eyeless Johnny comes out from beneath her couch and then eats her head. Double D dead. Yeah, this story was something alright. It goes all over the place, and if you think that this reading was over-exaggerating it, but the actual story just goes from one scene to another without context. And it's awesome. This is a story that I cannot stay mad at. It just has the right amount of edge and cheese that just makes these old creepypastas so charming. It tries so hard to be scary to the point where it's just throwing shit at the wall and see what works, with professionalism just thrown straight out the window. So he looked at a silly pasta that tries to be scary, so what about a pasta that somewhat exceeds from the norms of typical Lost episodes? Well, you're in luck, as the next pasta on our list is a Lost haunted game creepypasta. So this is the third most popular Ed, and Eddy creepypasta. It came at the coattail end of the classic creepypasta era, before everything became more professional with ungodly long titles. Because of that, this story kind of fell into a bit of obscurity. At the time, people quite enjoyed it, and unlike the previous two, it still has quite a good reputation among the community. However, does the story actually hold up, or was it left forgotten for a reason? Let's find out. Also, unlike the last story, I'm gonna go full-blown serious in this reading. This story started back in 2006, on 4chan, where all good things get ruined. An anonymous user uploaded a game onto the site with a poorly written out description saying, "Hello, I worked hard on this game. Please it would be very fun." Most people would obviously look past this post from its poor spelling, but some were curious on what was this game this person made. When they click on the link, it would take them to a download for a .rar file on MediaFire called Ed, and Eddy, the game. While some people who saw this immediately wrote it off as a badly made fan game and clicked off the site without a second thought, the ones who did play it were in for an odd experience. The game starts with the title screen that was just an image taken from the show's intro. There are only two options, play game or exit game. If you hit play game, it will send you to a black screen that would ask you to put in your information, as it would add more to the experience. After doing this, you would immediately be put into the game. It is a first-person Doom-like, where you walk around in a poorly made 3D cul-de-sac, where the show's main theme plays in an endless loop in the background. You must walk up to the center of the cul-de-sac, where all the characters stand. They are all simple 2D sprites that looked at you wherever you go. Heading towards them will cause subtitles to appear. It is Eddy, hyping up his new rocket in hope of getting the kids money. Then after that, a scene from the episode Ready Sir Ed plays. The scene is in very low quality and ends abruptly. The player is then thrown into a 3D box room. They will not know what to do until they are given a text from the game's creator telling them to type fast. Doing so would cause another cutscene to play, an old crash footage of a car. The clip would freeze on the last frame, and the player would be brought back to the 3D room, with the freezing frame plattered all over the walls, hinting that the scan went horribly wrong. Eddy and Double D would confirm this. Double D is distressed over the lives of the kids that were taken from the crash. Eddy only cared about the money they made. Double D then would retaliate against Eddy by saying that he would pay for his sins. The player is then thrown to a dark hallway. Double D, who was now chasing after them, he was edited to be black and white, with his mouth completely gone, with red eyes, and the show's main theme would now be playing in reverse. The player would receive a text at this point that simply just said, "Run." If the player typed run on the keyboard, they would hear audio of Double D crying, and if he touched the player, the game would crash. Some who were caught by Double D claimed to hear footsteps outside their rooms, even though they lived alone. So the player would have to run to the other end of the hallway to escape the demonic sockhead. Doing so, the player would be thrown into another dark room. The game would tell the player to tap the spacebar, which would cause the player character to infinitely jump. As you make it up, a wide brown polygon would appear from the bottom, chasing after the player until they reached the top. Reaching to the top would bring the player back to the cul-de-sac where instead of the cast of characters we all know and love, now stands a guillotine in the center. Text at the bottom of the screen would now say, "End this horrible game. Now." For the players who did, the game finally ended, but for the ones who did not, they will receive over 17 text messages within 1 minute that say, "End it." If they still did not listen, then they would receive a phone call that played the show's tune in reverse, until ending with a man screaming at the top of his lungs. After touching the guillotine, the player would be sent to a screen that congratulates them for completing the game, and would soon receive a DVD containing the making of this game. After the player clicked exit game, it would delete its own .exe file, making it unplayable. However, the other files would still be acceptable to the player. Looking for the files, the player would discover a .jpeg called Buttered Toast, which would show an old photo of an autopsy. To the players who sent their personal information to the game's creator, would have a package delivered to them about 3 or 4 months later. Only the first 50 players received this package, none of them recalling their bad experience with it. The package was both wet and smelled really bad. Inside of the box was a single CD that would have writing on it that said, "Making of Ed and Eddy, the game." Loading the disc into their computer, the player would see a .mp4 file on their desktop called "The Making Of." The video would start off with the show's intro before cutting to a white screen that only said, "The Make of the Game," which would show the crash footage used in the game. At the end of the crash, the audio of something screaming becomes insanely loud, to the point where it almost could damage speakers. Pausing the video would not stop the screams, but your computer would force a shutdown instead. Apparently, the people who watched it claimed to experience almost supernatural-like occurrences, like hearing a reverse theme song from distances and waking up in the middle of the night hearing footsteps outside their door while someone was whispering to them, "End it." This game received a lot of complaints from the ones who played it, causing it to be taken off the board, leaving the strange game to fall into obscurity, while its creator remained unknown, still out there, somewhere. While this story was definitely better than episode 34 in Purgatory, it does have a bit of realism to it, of a weird fangame that has a mysterious creator with disturbing imagery has actually happened before. Case in point, the Luna game, where a seemingly normal fan game contains a creepy image that jump scares you, that then copies itself onto your image folder. Not to mention the fact that this game also asks for your information, which is something you should never do if it's a random game you got from the internet, as there's a chance that a game like this could be a virus of some sorts. Now, of course, some people might be a bit discouraged from liking the story as it does contain a few cliches, such as the players hearing footsteps and reverse fire music, but to me personally, I don't mind cliches all that much, and I think that cliches should not be the main factor for whether or not a story is good or not, or if anything is good for the matter. Many famous stories and movies are filled with cliches. They are an unavoidable thing in any type of media. Now, should we judge them based on how they're executed? Yes, but should we judge them for just existing? No, because a lot of stories would not just be as memorable otherwise. So we went through episode 34, the 4chan game, and Purgatory. So now we have our third and final mystery pasta, which is, drumroll,
Hercules.
Nah, I wish. The final story is actually Mayflower. This is easily one of the rarest Ed and Eddy related pastas by a long shot, with there being hardly any videos about it. Does it deserve its rare reputation and having the honor of being the final story? Well, let's dive in and see. The story starts off by saying that after season 6, many of the staff were laid off, and in anger, they made a disturbing episode, and then one of them would go even further by leaking it. Only a small handful of people were able to download this episode before it was taken down, and the author was one of them. It starts with a normal intro, nothing out of the norm, until the title card came on saying Mayflower instead of the usual title cards. The episode starts with the Eds enjoying their day, until they hear on TV that a massive fire has broken out and everyone in Peach Creek needs to evacuate. Ed and Double D were both defeated, thinking that in their situation, it was hopeless for them. They were dead Eds. But Eddy refused to accept defeat, telling them that there was a safety shelter 10 blocks down. With his words, the Eds run down the street, rushing to the shelter if they wanted to survive. As they made it halfway through, Double D starts to slow down, tired as his poor stamina screws him over. He tells them to go on without him, but Ed refuses, trying to save his friend, but he was too slow as Double D was lost to the flames. Only thing surviving was his hat. Ed and Eddy continue. Ed, who is grieving over the loss of his late friend, suggests to Eddy that they should join Double D, but Eddy tries to put determination back into Ed, saying that it was not what he would have wanted. This gave Ed a little hope, now both running for their lives, to the shelter. The flame of the fire starts to spread rapidly, swallowing more and more of the town. As they make it to the shelter, they hear someone scream out behind them. To their surprise, Double D was alive, although severely burned. He was running down the street towards them. He tells them to quickly get into the shelter, as there was a helicopter taking people out of the town. After this scene, the episode glitches and skips a large portion, right to the end, where Eddy was seen in the helicopter, all by himself. With him being the only survivor, stricken by grief, he decides to join his friends and jumps into the fire. The episode ends with a bird's-eye view of the cul-de-sac burning down. Make for a good Halloween episode. So that was Mayfire. I quite like this one. As for someone who doesn't mind cliches or cares about realism, the story was a fun read. Of course, we all know how Ed and Eddy actually ended. Season 6 was cut short because Danny decided that working on a 6th season and big picture show at the same time would have been too much for his staff to handle, so he had to axe 1. You see, Danny is the good John K. And with that, it wraps up every creepypasta adventure. And what do I think about all these stories in general? They're fine. I personally think that Scarecrow Boy solos all of them by a long shot.